It's not good now. No.
My name's Jody, and last night was my first solo shift as a security guard at a small corporate office on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where the lights hum just a little too loud and every sound echoes. Quiet, still, boring, exactly what I thought I signed up for. I clocked in at 10 p.m., did my usual rounds, and settled into the security booth at the front of the building. Floor-to-ceiling glass surrounded me, giving me a full view of the empty parking lot and the flickering streetlight just beyond it. At 1:12 a.m., I heard the knock. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was weirdly soft, like whoever was knocking didn't really want to be heard. I looked up and saw a man standing on the other side of the glass door. He was wearing dark coveralls with a logo that was either too faded or fake. He had a mop bucket beside him and held up a badge. It looked laminated, but I couldn't read it. He smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hi," he said, his voice muffled but clear. "I'm the night cleaner. They called me in to do the third-floor carpets." I checked the schedule. Nobody was supposed to be in the building, and definitely no cleaner. "I don't have you on the list," I said, staying behind the booth window. "You'll have to contact your supervisor." He kept smiling. "Yeah, she probably forgot to call it in. I've been here before. Look, it's cold out here. Just let me in so I can get started. I'll be gone in an hour." "No one's supposed to be here tonight. You're not getting in." His smile faded a little. His hand pressed flat against the glass. "I'm supposed to be inside," he said, more firmly this time. "You don't want to get in trouble for keeping me out." I stared at him. I said no. He looked at me for a few seconds, then bent down to grab his mop bucket. I thought he was leaving, but instead he picked it up, then slammed it against the glass. Hard. The sound echoed across the lobby. "I'm not leaving," he said calmly. "You can call the number taped under your desk. They'll tell you." My skin went cold. There was a piece of paper taped under the desk. I'd noticed it earlier when I dropped my pen, but I hadn't thought anything of it. Slowly, I reached down and peeled it off. On it, in red ink, was a number. No explanation, just a number. I didn't want to call it. Every instinct told me not to. I picked up the phone and dialed the on-call supervisor instead. It rang 5 times, then 10. No answer. Meanwhile, the man outside had stopped looking at me. He was peering into the building like he was trying to see something, or someone. "Don't bother," he said, still facing the glass. "They won't answer." "How do you know that?" He turned to look at me again. His smile had returned, wider now. "Because I used to work this job," he said, "until I made a mistake." He leaned closer to the glass and whispered something I couldn't hear. I put my hand near my weapon and looked over at the phone again. "I am going to have to." I looked back, and then he was gone. Just like that. No footsteps, no fading. He just wasn't there anymore. I stayed locked in the booth until sunrise. When my supervisor finally arrived, I told him everything. He looked concerned, then confused. "There's no cleaning company hired for this building, and no one has your shift history. There shouldn't have been anyone here last night but you." I gave him the number from under the desk. He looked at it, then back at me. "This number, this is disconnected. Been out of service for years." I don't know what happened last night, but when I replayed the security footage later, the camera showed me in the booth talking to no one. There was no man at the door, just me, talking to the glass, alone. I used to think working at a toy store would be fun, wholesome even, but Jollytown Toys wasn't like that. It was one of those dying strip mall stores that refused to close. The carpet smelled like wet cardboard. The music system only played tinny holiday jingles year-round. And we were always short-staffed. That week, we were down to 3 employees. When my manager asked if I could cover a closing shift, I said yes. I needed the hours. It was just me that night. Carl, the assistant manager, clocked out early to pick up his daughter. I'd closed before, but never alone. It was a Thursday, quiet. A few parents came in after dinner. A teenage couple browsed the board games and left without buying anything. By 9:30, it was just me. The store had this long, poorly lit aisle 7, dedicated to dolls, plastic, cloth, porcelain, mechanical, the works. I never liked being there. Not because I believed in anything weird. It was just uncomfortable. The dolls always felt like cluttered reminders of a past nobody wanted anymore. I saved that aisle for last. I was halfway through the closing checklist when I heard a light thud. I paused, listened. Nothing. The building creaked sometimes, air pressure, old vents. Still, I walked over to aisle 7 to check. One of the larger dolls, the kind with blinking eyes and curls molded into the plastic, had fallen face down on the floor. I picked it up and returned it to the shelf. Didn't think much of it. But when I turned around, I noticed something odd. 3 or 4 of the dolls were no longer facing forward. They were turned, just slightly, toward the aisle entrance, like someone had rotated them while I was distracted. I stared at them for a good minute. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe a kid did it earlier, and I hadn't noticed. Maybe I bumped the shelf. Still, the hairs on my arms stood up. I was about to walk away when I saw movement, just barely, in the corner of my eye. A shadow at the far end of the aisle. I spun around. Nothing was there. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That's what I kept saying when I walked back to the front of the store, when I locked the front doors, when I turned the music system off, and the silence settled like a thick fog. At 9:57, I heard it again. A thud. Louder this time. Heavier. I looked at the camera feeds from the front monitor. One of the aisles, aisle 7, showed a doll lying on the floor again. But what bothered me wasn't that it had fallen. It was that it was one of the porcelain dolls from the locked glass cabinet. The key was in the back room. No one had opened it, at least not that I knew of. I didn't go back to check. I finished the checklist with shaking hands, locked the registers, grabbed my stuff. I was out the door at exactly 10:03 p.m. I didn't say anything to my manager the next day. What would I even say? But I started checking the security footage during slow shifts, just for curiosity. A week later, I found something from that night. At 9:56, a doll falls. It's out of frame, so you don't see how. But for a brief moment after it lands, the camera catches movement. A dark shape just at the edge of the frame. Maybe a coat. Maybe a person. I showed it to Carl. He shrugged. Probably a shadow, he said, or a customer we forgot about. But I knew the store was empty. I know it was empty. I never worked another closing shift. I transferred to a hardware store across town 2 months later. But sometimes, when I lock up at night and hear something shift behind me, just the light scrape of plastic or cardboard, I remember aisle 7.